Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's lecture on becoming Irish American. The chapter for this week talks about the reasons and conditions that existed in Ireland at the time that led to the large immigration of Irish folks to the United States. As we saw, by 1700, English conquest of Ireland resulted in the English taking over land, leaving only about 14% of the land to the Irish. The Irish become subsistence farmers as a result of the loss of their land, often becoming subsistence farmers on land that they were leasing. The conversion to cattle raising for export between 1820 and 1840 meant that the land was primarily converted to grazing for the cattle. And so this again left Irish agricultural workers without jobs or land. By the 1840s, the majority of the Irish poor survived on potatoes, which they could grow on their small plots of land. However, an unknown fungus attacks the potato crops for years, resulting in the potato famine and the large increase in immigration to the US. Between 1855 and 1900, 2 million Irish had come to the United States. Many of these folks, when they get here, become laborers, many working in construction, building canals and railroads. We saw that they developed one of the largest labor unions, the Secret Order of the Knights of St. Crispin. And the Irish were early on compared to African Americans and stereotyped in similar ways as savages and having a lack of self-control. However, we also saw how they became a competition for African American workers, which resulted in the Irish promoting their whiteness to support why they should be hired for positions instead of African Americans. We also saw how during the Civil War, the threat of unemployed slaves as competition for work was used to convince Irish workers not to support the Union Army or support the emancipation of slaves. So this again contributed to creating tensions and divisions between Irish and African Americans. Now, we also saw that even though that many of them were against serving in the Union Army, many ended up fighting in the Union Army after being drafted and being unable to pay the $300 fee that could help them avoid serving in the military. This resulted in what became known as the draft riots, where Irish were rioting in New York City against this rule of only being able to avoid serving in the war if basically you could afford it, if you had money to pay the $300 fee. The reading also talks about the particular experiences of Irish women workers. Many of them worked as domestic workers, replacing African-American women. Irish women tended to be unmarried and therefore suitable for domestic work in comparison to other European immigrant women. But the reading also talked about how what their conditions were for domestic workers, where they were working in these homes where they had no privacy or ownership of themselves as domestic workers. They were basically on and available 24/7 because many of them were living in the households in which they were working. Many of them also worked in textile mills, and the reading talked about the 1816 Pemberton mill disaster, where the building collapsed, trapping 900 workers, mostly Irish women, which indicates the dangerous conditions in which these women worked. By 1900, 1/3 of all seamstresses were Irish. So this gives you a sense of the experiences of Irish women also as part of the labor force, as workers, as part of the working class. But we also see that even though when they come at first, they experience significant amounts of hardship and challenges and so on, by the second generation, Irish are moving into white collar jobs. And part of this benefit comes from their whiteness, because they are allowed to naturalize and become citizens. And we saw in the reading how a large number of Irish Americans were becoming citizens by the second generation. And they were allowed to become citizens because of that 1790 naturalization law that stated that only white folks could become citizens. Another advantage that they had that allowed their upward mobility was the fact that they spoke English. They didn't have to worry about learning English in order to be able to assimilate or participate in white collar types of jobs. We also saw how once they became citizens, they entered political office and became a large voting bloc. And so they were able then to, as they gained political power in places like New York City, they were able then to look out for each other and provide benefits to each other. Many of these Irish also entered public service jobs like firemen and police officers. And for a very long time, firemen and police officers in New York City were dominated by Irish Americans. So this gives us a sense of the Irish American immigration and their experience of settling here, but also how their experiences differ from some of the other groups that we've been talking about, and why their upward mobility by the second generation is made possible in ways that it's not possible for other groups because they were not white. All right, this ends the lecture for this week. I'll see you guys in the discussion posts.